Row 13. A sleeping woman, a calm flight. And then, a captain's voice cuts through the quiet cabin. Is anyone here a pilot? No one knew that the person who would save them all was the woman who had almost forgotten she ever belonged in the sky. The afternoon sun streamed through the small oval window, casting a warm glow across the cabin. Most passengers were lulled into a state of calm, some reading, others listening to music, many simply dozing. In row 13, Amelia was one of them, her head resting against the cool plastic of the window, lost in a dreamless sleep. She was running from a life she no longer recognized, hoping a new city would offer a new beginning. The flight was just a means to an end, a quiet transition between a past she couldn't face and a future she couldn't picture. Suddenly, the gentle chime for the flight attendant sounded, a routine noise that barely registered. But what followed was anything but routine. The captain's voice, tight with an urgency that sliced through the comm, echoed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a medical emergency in the cockpit. D's. There are pilots on board. I repeat, is there a pilot on board this aircraft? Panic rippled through the cabin like a shockwave. Murmurs turned to frightened whispers. People looked around, their eyes wide with disbelief and growing fear. A baby started to cry. The flight attendants, their professional smiles replaced with masks of controlled concern, began moving down the aisle, their gazes sweeping over the passengers, searching for a sign, a hand, a voice of hope. But in row 13, as the world outside her began to unravel, Amelia's eyes snapped open. The captain's words weren't just a question. They were a ghost from a life she had locked away. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a deafening drum. A past she had buried 10 years ago was calling her name again. The flight attendant, a young woman with a pale, strained face, continued her desperate search down the aisle. Please, she asked, her voice trembling slightly, is anyone a pilot? Does anyone have any flight experience at all? Her eyes met the gazes of businessmen, tourists, and families, but each one shook their head, their faces etched with helplessness. The feeling of being trapped at 30,000 feet, with no one in control, was a suffocating collective nightmare. The plane gave a slight, unsettling lurch, and a few people gasped. For Amelia, the chaos in the cabin was nothing compared to the war raging inside her. Her hands, resting in her lap, were trembling. She could feel the phantom weight of the flight controls. The familiar layout of a cockpit instrument panel burned into her memory. She hadn't touched a cockpit in 10 years. Not since the accident. Not since she lost her best friend, her co-pilot, in a crash she had walked away from. The guilt had been a shroud she'd worn ever since, pushing her away from the sky she once loved. But destiny doesn't care about your fear. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It simply arrives. Amelia's mind raced. 10 years of running. 10 years of telling herself she wasn't that person anymore. But the faces around her, the scared child clutching his mother, the elderly couple holding hands, the flight attendant trying to keep it together, they weren't part of her past, they were her present. Her responsibility. The debate was over. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she unbuckled her seatbelt. The click echoed in the sudden silence of her section. She stood up, her legs unsteady. Every single eye in the cabin turned to her. The whispers stopped. In that moment, she was the focal point of every hope and every fear on that plane. The young flight attendant's eyes locked onto hers, wide with a desperate question. She didn't dare to speak. Amelia's voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. But it carried through the tense air with the force of a thunderclap. I can fly. The walk to the cockpit felt like a mile. Every step was heavy, each footfall a conscious decision to move forward, not back. The passengers watched her, a silent, unbroken wave of eyes following her every move. She wasn't just walking to the front of the plane. She was walking back into the life she had abandoned. Pushing open the cockpit door, she was met with controlled chaos. The first officer, a young man no older than 30, was frantically trying to manage the controls while speaking into the radio, his voice cracking with panic. On the floor, the captain was being attended to by another crew member, his face ashen. He was conscious, but clearly in no condition to fly. The first officer looked up as Amelia entered, his eyes wild. "Are you a pilot?" he stammered. Amelia didn't waste a second. "Amelia Hale, I flew 737s for 8 years. What's our status?" Her voice was firm, the old authority returning as if it had never left. The first officer, relieved to have someone, anyone, take charge, quickly briefed her. She slipped into the captain's empty seat. The moment her hands touched the yoke, a jolt went through her. It felt like coming home. The screens, the switches, the myriad of lights, it was a language she had once been fluent in. And with one touch of the controls, the muscle memory kicked in. The sky remembered her. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." Amelia's voice was steady as she spoke into the headset. All traces of the sleeping passenger gone. "This is Flight 815. We have an incapacitated captain, VR, declaring an emergency and requesting immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport." The voice from air traffic control came back, calm and professional, a lifeline in the storm. They gave her a heading, an altitude, a runway. As she banked the plane, the metallic body groaning in protest, the memories she had fought so hard to suppress came flooding back. A flash of lightning, the screech of tearing metal. Her friend's voice in her ear, shouting her name. For a second, her breath hitched. The fear was a physical thing, a cold hand gripping her heart, trying to pull her back into the darkness of that night 10 years ago. She closed her eyes for a split second, seeing her friend's face. Then she opened them, focusing on the horizon, on the blue line that separated the sky from the earth. The fight wasn't against the storm outside. It was against the storm inside you. She had a plane to land. She had lives to save. She couldn't let them down. Not again. The descent was the longest 20 minutes of her life. Every instruction from ATC, every adjustment to the flaps, every check of her airspeed was a battle won against the ghost of her past. The first officer worked beside her, his earlier panic replaced by a focused awe as he watched her command the aircraft with a precision that belied her 10-year absence. Through the cockpit window, the runway lights of the diversion airport finally blinked into view, a string of pearls in the twilight. "Runway in sight," she reported, her voice tight but controlled. In the cabin, there was a profound, prayerful silence. People held hands with strangers, their faces turned toward the windows. Their fates in the hands of the unknown woman in the cockpit. "This is it," Amelia whispered to herself. The plane descended, lower and lower, until the ground rushed up to meet them. With a deafening screech of rubber on asphalt, the wheels touched down. The plane bounced once, then settled, roaring down the runway as Amelia applied the reverse thrusters. The massive machine slowed, and finally, rolled to a stop. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, the cabin erupted. Cheers, applause, and tears of relief washed over the aircraft. She didn't just land a plane, she landed her courage. As the emergency crews surrounded the aircraft, the cockpit door opened. The passengers, still on their feet, turned to her as she stepped out. The applause grew louder, a wave of gratitude and awe. People reached out to touch her arm, to thank her, their faces shining with relief. A little girl, no older than 7, broke away from her mother and gently touched Amelia's hand. "You saved us," she said, her voice small but clear. Amelia looked down at the child and then at the faces of the people she had brought back to Earth. In that moment, she understood. She hadn't lost her calling. She had just been hiding from it. The sky hadn't taken her friend from her. It had given her a gift, a skill, a purpose. And today, that purpose had been realized. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's rising when the world needs you. If Amelia's story touched your heart, please like the video. Share it with someone who needs a little courage today. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that awaken the soul. Thanks for watching.